7. Installing the power cable and the ground cable. 7.1. Installing the BSCB power cable and ground cable. Line connection for integrated BSCB equipment. The 48-volt power supply exiting the DC power cabinet in the equipment room is led into the PD power plug-in box through the general filter on the cabinet top. After being processed by the PD power module, it is passed to the bus bar and then fed into each plug-in box nearby. The power cable should be assembled at the project site according to requirements. The protection ground of each unit plug-in box in the cabinet is interconnected to the protection ground of the cabinet top through the grounding copper bar in the cabinet. On the project side, connect the protection ground of the cabinet top with the tandem ground bar of the equipment room reliably. There are two kinds of 48-volt DC power cables: 25 square millimeters and 16 square millimeters. The first kind is usually in use. The power cable can be blue or black. Generally, the blue cable is connected to the 48-volt DC power supply and the black cable to the 48-volt ground. The 48-volt DC power cable is used for power supply connection from the power cabinet to the EMI filter on the top, from the EMI filter on the top to the PD power plug-in box, and from the PD power plug-in box to the REC bus bar. The 6 square millimeter power cable of the service plug-in box filter is adopted for power connection from the bus bar to the service plug-in box filter. The 4 square millimeter service backplane is adopted for the 48-volt power connection from the service plug-in box filter to the service backplane. The 1 square millimeter power cable of the fan plug-in box is adopted for the 48-volt power connection from the bus bar to the fan plug-in box. The 35 square millimeter yellow and green protection ground cable runs from the protection ground bar in the equipment room and from the cabinet top protection ground to the bus bar protection ground. Crimping the terminals. Power cables from the cabinet to the power cabinet of the equipment room to the grounding bar should be made up on site, as needed for each specific situation. The main task is to crimp the connector terminal. Based on the sleeve length of the round naked terminal, peel a short section of sheath off the power cable. Insert the exposed copper wire into the terminal sleeve, and then use the hydraulic pressure crimper to clamp them securely. When done, wrap the assembly with insulating adhesive tape of the same color. Fuse selection for the primary power supply distribution cabinet. The all-IP BSC cabinet can be configured with different capacities for either a single shelf office or multi-shelf office, and different service plug-in box combinations occur accordingly. Therefore, when selecting the fuse for the primary power supply distribution cabinet, combine the logical power consumption ratings of each plug-in box based on the actual configuration of the plug-in boxes for the site cabinet, and then calculate the fuse current required by the entire BSCB cabinet. When the BUSN resource plug-in box is fully configured, the maximum power consumption is 700 watt. The maximum current is 16.67 ampere, and a 30 ampere fuse is recommended. When the BCTC control plug-in box is fully configured, the maximum power consumption is 700 watt. The maximum current is 16.67 ampere and a 30 ampere fuse is recommended. When the BSPN Level 1 switching plug-in box is fully configured, the maximum power consumption is 1200 watt. The maximum current is 28.57 ampere and a 43 ampere fuse is recommended. 7.2. Installing the BTSB power cable and ground cable. The BDS and RFS sub-cabinets, as part of the BTSB cabinet, are connected to the 48-volt power cable, ground cable and protection ground cable in turn. The power cable size can be 25 square millimeters or 16 square millimeters. As the power consumption current of the RFS sub-cabinet is rather heavy, the 25 square millimeter 48-volt power cable and ground cable are normally employed. Since the power consumption current of the BDS sub-cabinet is small, 16 square millimeter 48-volt power and ground cables are usually adopted. A 35 square millimeter power cable is often selected as the protection ground cable. 7.2.1. Installing the BDS power cable and ground cable. The internal power cables of the BDS include those leading from the filter to the air switch to the right bus bar, the bus bar to the BDS backplane and the fan plug-in box backplane. The power cables from the filter's 48-volt terminal to the air switch and from the air switch to the right bus bar are black 4 square mm conductors. Both ends are identified via blue heat shrink tubes. The power cable from the filter 48-volt ground to the 48-volt ground terminal of the right bus bar has a black 4 square mm conductor. The power cable from the filter P-ground to the ground terminal of the right bus bar is a yellow and green 4 square mm conductor. The power cable from the bus bar to the BDS backplane is a 9-core power cable, and it is connected to 48-volt, 48-volt ground and PE respectively, according to the labels on the backplane and bus bar. The power cable from the bus bar to the fan plug-in box backplane is a 3-core power cable. It is connected to 48-volt, 48-volt ground and ground respectively, according to the labels on the backplane and bus bar. 7.2.2 Installing the RFS power cable and ground cable. Internal power cables of the RFS include the power cables from the filter output to the right connector hole at the air switch, from the left connector hole at the air switch to the 48-volt right bus bar, from the bus bar to the backplane, from the bus bar to the linear amplifier LPA, and the ground cable from the backplane to the bus bar. When laying power cables and ground cables, note to distinguish them using different colors. Generally, the 48-volt power cable is blue, the ground cable is black, and the P-ground cable is yellow and green. Power cables and ground cables should be laid tidily and regularly, without crossing each other. Differently colored cables must not be bound together, and any surplus cable length should be cut off. The power cable from the DC distribution cabinet to the BSCB BTSB cabinet should be one whole section, without joints or breaks, and both ends should bear the engineering labels from both power cable and ground cable.